has to affect crops and productivity across the United States and all the way across to England. You can see it into the Mediterranean and into the southwestern parts of Russia.
Well, that's the scary thing. That's the scary thing too, Stan, as you brought that up, because food prices are just increasing at such a quick rate, and especially as we see things happen like the bird flu, and that's affecting the poultry and even eggs. My wife and I went just down to Dollar General yesterday, and we bought a dozen eggs. It was $3.50 for a dozen eggs, and I'm wondering how prepared people are for these price changes, and there's no way to add this into their budgets when people are making less money than they should be, actually.
Yeah, I know. They look off the West Coast, in addition to just like impacting crops and disease spread over the rest of the United States. Offshore, there's like a several 100-mile long band of red algal bloom, very deep and very intense, and that produces an acid. I think it's called domoic acid, which is toxic to humans, and it's certainly toxic to marine life. They've been finding a number of marine critters that they're washing up on the shore that they've been trying to repair. What do you call them? Not dolphins, but anyway.
The whales are. Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's affecting their eyes. It hasn't killed them yet, but they eat shrimp and various other things that we do too. But when they're infected from the toxins produced by this huge algal bloom, it gets into the food chain. So they've been closing a number of fisheries along the West Coast because of that. So that's another impact directly from this El Nino.
Well, we get the red tide here in on the Gulf Coast. We haven't had it this year that I remember, but you're right. It burns your eyes, and that's just the red tide, and it's poisonous to fish, and a lot of bad breathing problems and stinging eyes for people who are close to the shore. But you can see dead fish. They'll come up on the banks. But I think what we're seeing now is a combination of things. We know that the Gulf oil spill took place, 2010? We're looking at 5 years later, and there's evidence that the coral reefs are dying and that they're catching shrimp with no eyes, and these are accounts that I'm hearing from fishermen. They're seeing the algae's just covered in like a protective slime, like it's trying to protect itself from whether it's Corexit. I'm not really sure that crude oil in its natural form would be toxic to marine life because, well, fissures in the ocean floor are naturally occurring, aren't they? Isn't there oil always seeping into the ocean? So it can't really just be crude oil that could be causing this. It's everything else that's the particulates that are being added to it, I guess.
Yeah, to break it up. Yeah, the artificial or like refined chemistry that goes in there that doesn't go away. A friend of mine works with part of the mitigation crew along the coast there. Constantly testing, marine life and the water and stuff for evidence of the chemistry they've added to break up the oil. It's going to be going for a while that way.
Well, what about the volatilized particulates, from just natural evaporation or consumption? What about those volatilized particulates into the atmosphere along with everything else that's going up? And, this is acid rain is a terror, but what about chemical rains?
Oh, I'm sure we'll see more of that. If not happening now, it will be soon, I'm sure. I relate those to part of the judgments in the tribulation period as being, worldwide punishments, if you wish.
Yeah.
You're talking about that red tide. When I was still in Australia back in about 2000, it was 1999 to 2000, somewhere in there, we had a red tide or an algal bloom on the southern coast of Australia. Now, those things may happen from time to time, but this was a severe one that walked around the coastlines left and right, up to the northern coastlines of Australia, and it killed millions and millions of sardines, and they washed up on the shore with the algal bloom on them, and they were dead. But they found that no other bacteria that normally rot fish would touch them. Flies wouldn't even land on the dead fish. And they found out that a warming of the Southern Ocean beneath Australia in that particular year had caused a melt of an old ice layer in Antarctica. And that ice layer contained archaeobacteria, which were thousands of years old and been frozen in the ice. And they were mighty. I mean, they were like the dinosaur of life. And they came straight up in a stream that hit the bottom around Australia, around Adelaide. And so that was a most unusual thing, in that it produced released a bacterium that we had no natural defenses for.
Right.
It did pass eventually, but boy, what a mess that was.
Yeah, it is. And you know, that's the thing about it. You got millions of sardines that are washed up dead on the shore and nothing will touch them. So, yeah, I mean, they're great for fertilizer, and that's the only thing you can do at that point is get a bulldozer and start hauling them up and planting them.
Yeah. I don't know what they did do to get rid of them, but boy, they were all around the coastline.
Oh, I can imagine.
When you have increased ultraviolet penetrating our ozone layer, well, like the ionosphere, that also reduces your immune system and produces irritability. They see crime rates go up and divorce rates climb during these periods, which are produced by solar radiation in the ultraviolet spectra penetrating more than normal. Now, because the Earth's magnetic field is weakening even faster than predicted 3 years ago, it is weakening the shield that we have, like in Star Trek, for the ship. Our shield is the ionosphere. And it's weakening and allowing more ultraviolet radiation and other types of radiation, other frequencies, to get through. This is going to eventually give people nausea, pinprick burns, or burning sensations on their bare skin,
right?
Because of the stuff getting through.
Well, I agree.
I
can agree because I remember growing up that we didn't hear a lot about skin cancer. I mean, I'm talking back in the early '60s. It was around, but you didn't hear about it. But nowadays, everybody's you see a lot more cases of just skin cancer, don't you?
Yeah, and I suppose we could directly relate that to exposure to certain frequencies, UVB and UVC range, for sure.
I mean, I know that this year seems a lot hotter, in the sun on the beach than last year at the same ambient temperature. It seems like the solar energy is just more intense.
Do you notice white things out in the sun seem to hurt your eyes when you look at them more than they did?
Yeah,
that's the ultraviolet spectrum doing that. The ultraviolet leakage through the atmosphere is greater over ozone layer holes as well. And I was in one of those over Perth, Australia, for several months. And I'll tell you right now, what happens when that gets all over the planet is going to be very miserable, because we could not get out in the sun with full clothing on, whether you were driving in a car and it was shining through the window, or whether you were out there in it, without uncomfortable, piercing pinpricks where the sun was hitting through the jeans and the clothing.
Yeah.
And they put out public service announcements there in Perth to the housewives saying, when you're hanging out your white linens, wear sunglasses to protect your eyes, because this will hurt you. And it did. I mean, even on the highways, even though you were only getting reflected light off the road, it was making your eyes cry uncontrollably as you drove in that increased ultraviolet. And I think this will be more planet-wide as the layer weakens. The magnetic field is swapping, and it's going to weaken the field. Well,
and that, plus we know according to God's word that the earth would be teetering or wobbling, and there is evidence of that. I said on the air, it's been a long, long time ago. It wasn't long after I had you on air last time. It seems like this year all the hurricanes that we would normally get that are developing in the Atlantic between Africa and Cuba are developing on the West Coast this year. I mean, and I noticed this last year. It seems like all the hurricanes that we would normally see start developing, I mean, at this time of year, it's not really hurricane season here yet, but usually we see some tropical depressions forming off the coast of Africa, and we watch those pretty closely because we live in the Gulf, and if we get a hurricane up in here, it can bounce around and do a lot of damage, as Katrina will tell us. So we watch those things really carefully because once they tend to, when they get into the Gulf, to move pretty quickly. So, and erratically too. I don't think they can really tell for sure what hurricanes are going to do anymore because it seems like they're, it used to be it's going to go this way, and now you look and there's so many different scenarios that could happen with the track of a hurricane these days. But could it be that the Earth is wobbling in such a way that, or has tilted in such a way that I know this sounds kind of crazy, but let's look at the atmosphere as the skin of an orange, maybe, and that the flesh of the orange would be the Earth itself, and that the skin was separated from the orange, so it moves freely on the outside of it. Could it be that the weather we should be getting, they're getting on the West Coast now, or in the Pacific?
I'm sure you may be seeing that the West Coast is getting it, but I think this is primarily due to the weakening magnetic field and to increased emissions from the sun this year. Even though we didn't have a very high sunspot number count this year, we had a lot of coronal mass ejections and a lot of flares, and almost every other day we're seeing large flares coming off of the sun, indicating to those of us that watch this that the sun is doing something extraordinary.
Right.
And we know that since 1992 there have been 2 new bands of ultraviolet light being emitted by the sun, which tells us that the nuclear reactions, the chemistry, the equations, you wish, of how the sun is functioning are changing. And the Russian data has shown that the sun has burned up half of its hydrogen fuel for the normal fusion reactions doing now. So we may be going to a helium reaction, and the sun will change color and possibly even start to grow larger over a period of time. I don't think that the dating system that we use, the radiometric dating system for age of strata in the Earth or age of the solar system of the universe, is anywhere near correct.
Right, I agree.
Because science uses the decay of
carbon dating,
various things, the half-life. Mm-hmm. They base that on the speed of light and the fine structure constant of the universe. Mm-hmm. All these are functions of the density of space. And since electromagnetic radiation or light and other radiation frequencies travel through the density of space, and it's not empty space, it's full of a lot of very small particles. At the Big Bang, the speed of light was, probably 30 with 10 zeros, an exponent behind it,
right.
Faster than it is now. And so the decay rate at the Big Bang was just hugely quicker, like, in seconds or milliseconds compared to now. So our dating is stretched out as the speed of light slowed down to where it is now, starting to plateau. What is happening is that we're saying that the speed of light has always been that constant, therefore the universe is, 15 billion years old. And this is not right.
Right, because light is decreasing in speed as time goes by because of time actually being a measurement of distance traveled. I'm with you.
Okay.
And I'm sure my listeners our listeners are kind of catching it too. You explained it in such a really, really good way. But, maybe while I've got you on the air, I could ask you this question, and I'm trying to wrap my head around it in such a way because I'm not a physicist and I'm really not that smart of a guy, Stan. But I do read God's Word. But if, according to Einstein's theory of relativity, the faster that an object travels, right, the slower time passes. Am I correct in that?
Well, it's relative time, yeah. That's what his theory says, but his theory has been proven to be an error on that. And without getting too technical, it is a simple misinterpretation of an experiment done by Michelson and Morley in 1925.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm familiar.
And Einstein based his theory on that. Using that theory, not only does time slow down, your mass starts to flatten out and become infinite, and that's an absurdity created by the error in the mathematical interpretation. Michelson and Morley determined with an experiment they did that the Earth, although it was moving through space around the sun, proved that there was no space, or medium around us, no fluid space, no ether space, because they couldn't detect any variation in the speed of light.
Right.
And so Einstein and Lorentz and Fitzgerald, the Dutch physicists, they all jumped on it and said, therefore, we'll have to invent this little mathematical expression that will bring everything back into control.